topic I chose to further investigate was that of online anonymity, and in the two stimulus materials, Banksy thought to be behind Cheltenham artwork by BBC News and When Librarians Are Silenced by Francine Prose, a prevalent theme among the two is freedom of speech. And in these two situations, art and public speaking are tangible examples of how people, specifically Americans, exercise their right to freedom of speech. This idea of communication then led me to consider the internet, which is where many people communicate today, especially concerning my generation. In this non-traditional situation, there is less restraint among users and more contention. As a result, users may seek an anonymity in which their identity and privacy is preserved. This led me then to question the anonymous and to what extent it impacts the American legal system. There is high unclarity and little understanding of how the two coexist, and online communication is a fundamental aspect of American society as well as the professional world. Therefore, it's important to consider and determine to what extent the two do coexist in order to continue online pursuits. The thesis form considers both the psychological and legal implications that are appropriate for the overarching claim. Socially, as seen in the psychological studies, anonymity proves to be a complex and prominent facet as a means of communication, but in legal implications should not heavily impact the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. The psychological facets that are here, when you're looking at them, it's important to consider both the fact that environmental and societal constraints cease to exist. As a result, a disinhibited effect occurs, according to Dr. John Suhler, professor of psych at Rider University. There is more personal sharing and more acts of humanitarian behavior. Or conversely, there's more hatred and violence. Jeff Kosef, assistant professor of cybersecurity law at the U.S. Naval Academy's Cyber Science Department, agrees that there is more atypical acts. However, he diverges from this by saying that the negative anonymous that Suhler observed are minute relative to the civil. Therefore, democracy and therefore anonymous speech should not, they should continue to exist and they should be protected as they precede negligible trolling acts. In the legal situations, as can be seen here, the prosecutors challenge courts to preserve the right of anonymity, and therefore courts become involved and must determine to what extent anonymity is preserved before subpoenas are imposed. Michael Traynor, President Emeritus, which is the classification of a retired professor, and Chair of Counsel Emeritus of the American Law Institute, addressed the McIntyre versus Ohio Elections Common of 1995. And in this case, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that a statute prohibiting anonymous campaign literature was unconstitutional. The McIntyre court also said that persuasion is higher when people speak anonymously online, and there's less class distinction and division. Therefore, Traynor argues that anonymous online communication rectifies limitations within offline communications. And when looking at the solutions, it's important to consider this entire scale because the solutions would need to consider all impacts and facets of what constitutes online anonymity. A logical solution would be federal action to determine the First Amendment and online anonymity and how they function together in society. A bill would be drafted to plainly state all forms of protected and unprotected forms of speech within the First Amendment. Then this would then dictate the federal, state, and local rulings, and then it would determine how the two, it would impose all of them over each level. And this would ultimately be infeasible as instances would continue to arise that have no solution explicitly written in these drafted bills. It would also, it wouldn't work for the federal, state, and local court rulings because they're not all equal, as well as the fact that cases are all unique. Therefore, a recommendation would be to create many laws that encompass a broader scope of online communication, and therefore the Supreme Court would then formally state to what extent it would or would not be protected. And lastly, further research of cyberspace and free speech laws would be necessary in order to create more suitable laws.